All right, second grade, we're going to wrap up the sounds of the orchestra. And to do that, I'm going to read about each section of the orchestra. So we have our string family, woodwind family, brass family, and percussion family. And I'm going to read a little bit of information about each of those families. Our string family. Most of the instruments in the string section look alike. The main difference between them is their size, as they are all played in very much the same way. Their strings can be plucked or made to sound with a bow. Strings are used to provide a piece of music with a deep, rich body of sound, and they are often used in solo pieces as well. The largest section in the orchestra, the string section, uses 60 to 70 musicians to create a good, strong sound in the modern orchestra. In the string section, there are 5 groups of players: the first and second violins, the violas, cellos, and double basses. There may also be a harp and piano. They are the backbone of the orchestra, and as such, they are so important that they are in the front of the orchestra nearest to the conductor. And here's a little picture of where our string family instruments sit while they play. Here is our conductor. We have our double basses, which remember is our largest string instrument. We have the violas and the cellos, first and second violins, and if there is a harp, they sit behind the violins. And if there's also a piano player, they would sit up front here, actually behind the conductor. On to the woodwind family. All the instruments in the woodwind section are played with wind, which means they blow into them. For the most part, they look like sticks, though some are longer than others, but they have very different shapes. The different shape and materials of each instrument help create its unique sound. Woodwinds also vary in how they are played. The flute and piccolo have a hole that the musician blows across, and it's kind of like blowing across the top of a bottle, if you've ever done that before. This wind vibrates through the flute, creating a sound. The other instruments in this section use a reed. A reed is a narrow strip of cane that vibrates when a player blows on it, creating sound. The clarinet, oboe, and bassoon, as well as the English horn, use a reed. And here's our picture of where the woodwind section sits in our orchestra. So again, here's our conductor. Right in front of him, we have our flutes and oboes. Behind him there, we have clarinets, sometimes saxophones, right? There would also be English horns in here. And then we have our bassoon section as well. And remember, the bassoon is the largest woodwind instrument. On to our brass family. As you might guess, the instruments in the brass section are usually made of metal, often brass. They are played with the air from the player, and so they too are wind instruments, and somewhat similar to the woodwinds. The difference between the two sections is that the musician who plays brass must use his or her lips instead of the reed to make the vibrations to make a sound. Tensing his or her lips against the mouthpiece and blowing through them, the musician makes his or her lips vibrate just like the reed in an oboe does. This makes the air in the brass instrument vibrate, and the tone differs depending upon how tense the player's lips are. Loose lips vibrate slowly and create low sounds, while tight lips vibrate quickly and make high sounds. Brass instruments are really just long metal tubes that flare out at one end. They are actually quite long, so the tubes are bent and folded into more smaller shapes that are easier to hold. This portability combined with their loudness and the fact that their tone carries a long way is the reason why brass instruments are often used in marching bands as well as orchestras. And again, here we have our conductor. Here's our string and woodwind instruments. Behind all of them sit our brass families. So we have our French horns first, and then our trumpets, trombones, and tubas. So all of our brass instruments sit behind all of these other instruments. And last but not least, we have our percussion family. The section with the greatest variety of instruments in it is the percussion section. Included here are instruments that make a sound when banged, tapped, or shaken. Although it might seem as if there would be a bunch of musicians here playing all of these different sorts of instruments, there actually aren't. A percussionist may play many different instruments during a concert. In the percussion section, the triangle player usually doubles as a tam-tam player, and the bass drum player can play the snare drum. But the cymbals only play cymbals, and the timpanist only plays timpani. Nowadays, there's occasionally someone called utility percussionist who will play anything other than the timpani. This works because the percussion instruments usually do not play at the same time. So again, you can have many, many different instruments in the percussion section, and usually one player will play several different of those instruments. Okay, again, we have our conductor, string, and woodwind instruments, all of our brass instruments, and then on the sides, we have our percussion instruments. So over here, we usually have our snare drums, probably our bass drum as well. Over here, these are your timpani, which are your larger drums. Okay, and then of course, they could also have triangle, tambourines, glockenspiels, xylophones, things like that, kind of spread out in between the percussion section as well. All right, second grade, so that was a little bit more information about the different instruments that go into an orchestra and where they sit when they play. All right,